So, Lord Varys is speaking out about what happened with Season 8 of Game of Thrones. I think it's fairly well known among the fandom that Mr. Hill was pretty disappointed with what they did with Varys. He sort of subtly let people know he was disappointed, but in a much more candid interview recently, he's much more explicit that he didn't like what they did with Varys. He was actually very emotional about it. It's pretty obvious from the documentary that showed him slamming the script that it was not a good ending in his eyes. So we're going to let Talking Thrones take over for a little bit and get into the details of what he thought went wrong with season 8.
Complaints at all, he told the Times. I just felt frustrated with the last couple of seasons because Varys wasn't the all-knowing character he had been. I think the writers wanted to do one thing to end it, and the studio HBO wanted to do another. I felt that the last season was a bit rushed. I was inconsolable, but now I'm fine about it. Now, Hill's not lying about being inconsolable. After Varys was executed in one of Game of Thrones' final episodes, The Bells, the actor told Entertainment Weekly in an in-depth interview that nothing could console him after learning.
Well, I'm on record that I agree with most people that season 8 is pretty awful. I guess you want to be fair and say it had a few good moments and it had some good elements like cinematography and costumes. But in terms of the main story and the characters, as well as just a lot of plot issues, even behind the scenes issues, it was just a very big mess. And it didn't help that Benioff and Weiss did a lot of tricky things to try to gaslight people and lie about what happened and just denying the truth for a long time. Peter Dinklage, for instance, is very defensive about season 8, thinking it was meant to be very shocking and, quote, subversive. And you have other people who are pretty big in the hierarchy, like Amelia Clark. She didn't like a lot of things that happened with season 8, but she didn't think that Dany did anything wrong, which I find pretty insane, but I understand where she's coming from, that there were a lot of monsters on Game of Thrones, so comparatively Dany could be seen as a lesser evil. I don't agree, but there we are. So it has its defenders and detractors, but the number is pretty insane. The proportion of people who worked on the show who are quietly or loudly saying season 8 went wrong is now pretty high, and the ratio of people defending it and saying it's brilliant is pretty small. He also went on to note that it was especially disappointing because we didn't get any closure with him and Littlefinger, and he thought that was a really big missed opportunity.
He went on to say, "You can't help feeling that you failed in some way, that you haven't lived up to some expectation that you didn't know about. The only thing that consoles you are the people who worked a lot harder than you and who are in the same boat, so that helps. I don't think anybody who hasn't been through it can identify with it. They think, what's all the fuss about? You're all finishing anyway. But you take it personally, you can't help it." Although Hill ultimately thought that Varys' death was noble and in line with the character's ideals, he still had his disappointments. For example, he lamented the lack of closure between Varys and his longtime political rival Littlefinger.
I do think it would have been a better story if he and Littlefinger did have a confrontation, because, like many people, I do consider Littlefinger probably one of the best characters. The way they killed him off, too, was really damn stupid and awful. General agreement, but I'm not tied that it had to be a confrontation with him and Aiden at the very end. It was very disappointing they didn't have a kind of final scene together, but I can imagine a good writer could have conjured up something with Littlefinger and Varys where they don't directly confront one another, but what was done was pretty atrocious and stupid. Aiden himself did actually like what they did with his character, but I'm more on Mr. Hill's side. But again, I can imagine a different story that at least was somewhat respecting the characters. It doesn't have to be a final confrontation, but something that brought better closure between the two characters. So I disagree a little bit with the fandom that it had to be a certain kind of story. I'm okay with Jon Snow not killing the Night King and things like that. Again, you can do a different kind of story, but it should be a very high quality story. But what was given was a very low quality story, and one that was shocking for no reason and just generally stupid from the Starbucks coffee on down. It just felt really dumbed down for no reason except just money and trying to get bigger ratings and make Benioff and Weiss world famous, and which they did become, ironically, but in a really bad way. Now they're known universally as D&D, and they've got a new thing with Netflix, which I will try to be fair and give some thoughts on, but I don't want to really try to promote them anymore. So it's going to continue this revisionism about season 8, and I'm glad that Hill is speaking out, and we're getting more clarity because for a long time the fans were being lied to and saying, well, you're just making things up. Everything is fine. It's a perfect production. You just don't understand how things are working at HBO. But no, even the HBO people are on record now saying, we didn't want the show to end this rapidly, but for whatever reason, Benioff and Weiss got it into their heads that they were better writers than George Martin and just radically changed the story, even radically changed their own story from the earlier seasons and gave us a very shocking and divisive final seasons because reasons, I guess. So it's a very interesting interview, and I'm sure, yes, many more people will speak out. I only want to give one factual correction that Talking Thrones is saying other people have not spoken out. No, a couple of people have been on record, like Nick as well as Lena. But overall, it was a very strong video. But yes, a lot of people have already spoken out, but we don't have the entire cast giving their thoughts. So it'll be interesting. In a few more years, we're going to get a more well-rounded picture. And I think overall, it will be a very devastating look at what D&D did. And we have to just live with the consequences from now on.
How things ended.
Yes.
She didn't say yes. You didn't say yes.
Best season ever! It's the best. It's the best season ever.
Without telling us anything, because I know you can't, are you all happy with the way with the outcome of the show? Personally, or just